Good morning, everybody.
Morning.
Morning.
Good morning.
How is everybody this morning?
Good. How are you?
Wonderful.
Awesome.
I'm just excited to be here this morning. I can tell by everybody else's faces that they are too. Is there anybody else we're waiting on?
Yeah, we're missing a handful of people. Like Yanni.
Yanni is on PTO.
Thank you.
Sorry about
And
that.
Ben, I think you know that Sean's not going to be here today.
Yes. Yep, I forgot to mention that, Lindsay.
Okay.
All right, it's 2 minutes after 9. We will get started with our class this morning. Appreciate everyone being here. This will be the best 3 hours of your week. Me and Dan teaching. It's scheduled for 3 hours. We might be able to get through it in 1 hour, though. We'll see what happens.
Hey, hate to interrupt, Ben, but I do have to skip out early today. I got the fire marshal coming through at 11 o'clock. So
11 o'clock. All right.
Yep.
No problems, Matt.
thank you.
But yeah, no, this will be a 3 hour class, lots of discussion. Hopefully we can get some good interaction from y'all. And we'll be discussing a topic that I think most of y'all are pretty familiar with, project management. So we may be introducing some new terms and some new techniques. So please, as we're going through, I want everyone obviously to learn. If you have questions, so please raise your hand and ask. We do try and tie all of our classes and everything we do to our cause as we create a healthier future and bring remarkable experience to life. And, you know, all the classes that we're doing really tie into our cause very well. Again, with our housekeeping rules, we want to make sure everybody is following these, keeping your camera on, unless you have an emergency or something. Actively participate, mute yourself, raise your hand if you have questions or want to make or answer. Make sure you're engaged in discussions, and we'll take breaks appropriately.
All right, so our course learning objectives. 1, manage project scopes, budgets, and resources to achieve desired project outcomes. Number 2, apply agile and waterfall project management principles appropriately to various project types and sizes to manage the project's schedule, budget, resources, and communication. Leverage lean product principles to reduce waste and eliminate activities that yield little or no economic benefit. Number 4, administer change management best practices throughout a project to realign expectations and engage the project team in decision making. So,
Justin, did you have something before we move on? I saw your hand was raised.
No, I was looking at the chat and hit that by
Oh,
accident.
okay. All right, cool.
we already got one problem child already here. All right, we'll go to learning objective number 1, scope, budget, and resource management. So, what types of non-construction projects are implemented at Novant? And this is where I'm going to get you guys to participate just a little bit.
So we'll be talking, as we talk about project management today, you know, it's not necessarily related specifically to construction projects. So what are some other examples that y'all can think of?
I know one of you guys is going to say the M4. I know it's going to happen.
N4 WFM.
Exactly.
Got some hands raised.
Justin,
Yeah, DPS projects. We have several of those.
exactly. Brian,
Like a recycling project, what to do with cardboard and stuff like that.
Good one.
yep. Anybody else? All right. Now Ben's going to dig in just a little bit deeper, and kind of go through a couple.
Yeah, so y'all mentioned a few that would fall on this list, but education training, I mean, really what we're doing now, this whole process for our leader education was a project that a core group of us have been working on, along with some of the other education and training programs that we're working on Novant. Software transitions like N4 workforce management, as Dan mentioned, all that fun stuff that is causing all of us great challenges these days. Sustainability measures, as I mentioned about the recycling, quality improvement processes, and cloud migration, document management, those type of things. So all different types of projects. So it's not specific to construction. So just keep that in your mind as we're going through some of these processes. While we might have some examples that are construction related, not all projects are about construction.
Exactly. So the first thing we need to determine is the project feasible? And then once we determine it's feasible, then we kind of figure out what the scope is going to be. So you can use this with team members, get their collaborative input on feasibility. You can do it yourself. Then, once you have determined it's feasible, then we actually want to develop a scope, and we'll get a little deeper into that. But the scope, communicating the project's purpose, that's going to be the first thing we want to do. Then we want to agree on tasks and plans. And then when managing the development process, and we'll dig just a little bit deeper on all of these as we progress through this.
So scope, budget, schedule. We'll say that probably 1,000 times as we go through this and talk about those three key things and variables in projects. Scope involves identifying the project purpose and stakeholders, as Dan was mentioning. Budget, obviously, obtaining bids, very important. Making sure that our budgets are correct as we're developing them. And then obviously our schedule, that we put some milestones on a project that we can achieve so that we get the correct deliverables, and as we work to complete it and then hand it over to the owner of the project.
So we, of course, with all those being said, we want to balance, the scope, the budget, and the schedule. So how do we do this? So if you think about it as a seesaw, and that little triangle right there is that center balancing point. Once we develop the scope and we've got the cost and the time, and that's all agreed upon. But what happens if you have to add, some scope? Obviously, with adding scope, you're going to increase that time. So that's kind of, as you increase scope, you increase time. And then as you decrease, think about, decreasing time, or cost, the scope will actually decrease. So it's all relative. We want to make sure that we're allowing enough time and keeping that balance moving forward.
We got three major phases of project management: planning, execution, closeout. Now I do know that a lot of you that are in this group have been involved with or run various types of projects. So you all know some of this information already, but with these three major phases, this helps us break it down where we can communicate better, we can manage risk better, and then have a positive outcome, obviously for the project as we go through. So.
Well, as Ben stated, that first is the planning activities, or the planning stage. We want to establish and engage the project team. That's that collaborative team. Creating a project work plan. Obviously, planning activities, we're definitely going to come up with a plan. We assess the project related risk and the mitigation plans. We want to develop the budget. You may have a budget before with that feasibility and, at the very beginning, so you may be able to just enhance that just a little bit, maybe break it down just a little bit further. And then you want to establish those communication channels. That could be the kickoff meetings, the how often do we meet? So, and who is on, the teams.
The project scope, make sure it's clearly defined. Obviously at the beginning phases of a project, and you're starting to put the scope together, you want to make sure you clarify what those objectives are and the strategies and outcomes that you want from the project that you're working on. But having the scope put together, clearly defined, getting all the stakeholder input on that scope in the onset is really critical as you move forward to, we'll talk some more about scope creep and things like that as we go along. But if you can have that project scope clearly defined on the onset, that's going to prevent some of those potential risks with the project in the future.
So as Ben mentioned, a little bit of scope creep here, and that clearly defining your scope. We're actually working on a project here in Huntersville with the MRI, and we ran into a little bit of this, creeping when we kind of put the project out there first. Just as soon as the stakeholders got involved, and I know everyone has seen this, they wanted this, they wanted that, they wanted everything to be added. One of the things they really were pushing for was a sink. And obviously that's a challenge. You've got to get plumbing to it, you got to get the drain. And unfortunately for this one, it was on grade. So you can see that automatically adding a sink was going to add to the budget. So we kind of evaluated it. We didn't have enough contingency money in there, so we kind of took it out, and we also didn't have enough time. So with that, we avoided the distraction of adding that sink right off the get-go. Because it was going to take too much time. We didn't have enough budget. So we communicated that with the stakeholders or the collaborative teams here, and we developed change early on. Obviously, everything is going to have a little bit of change, and the sink wasn't the only thing. And then we analyzed additional potential solutions, for some other things that we ran into, and then just trying to keep everything on track.
So at this stage of the project, we're working with and engaging some of our resources and doing some budget planning. This is where we might get some high level estimates, for what the project entails. It's where we might be engaging some vendors, and starting to put some rough time frames together. This is where we also have to be careful when we're doing this stage that, if we have a rough estimate, for example, on what the project may cost, sometimes that's based on some very loose information, and maybe we haven't completely finalized our scope yet. If we're communicating some of those rough estimates, that can potentially have a derailing effect down the road, with your project. So this is more for the project manager, as they're working on it, to get some ideas together and to start involving and planning for some of those things.
So we also want to create a project plan, work plan. With that, we want to look at, who's going to be responsible for what, the outcomes, the timeline. Obviously we can't do everything in, the timelines that were allotted. We were allotted 3 months for this MRI project, and we've kind of gone into our 5th month now because of some small delays. And that kind of come into our action items, our action steps. What do we do for these? So with these action plans, you can see all the the things that we roll into. And one way to do that is, next slide, through Gantt charts. So the Gantt chart is something I've used in the past, and I've done it with just an Excel program. I've kind of just used this to kind of outline the steps, the process, for this particular chart here, you can see they've got it divided up into month 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5. And then they've got a design, they've got pre-construction, construction. So you can see how they've kind of broken things down, and then the subcategories underneath it. So one of the things on there is the taskbar. Oh, I'm sorry. Oh, yeah, there we go. I'm sorry. Taskbars. With those, you can see the design is taken the first month, and then 3 weeks out of the second month is pre-construction. That kind of shows you durations, what's going on at those times. You can see, like in design, you've got 2 other items underneath that we're outlining. So it kind of puts everything in a nice little, I guess, a priority level, or at least a flow. And then task dependencies, like we were showing, saying that we got the 2 additional lines underneath the design. You can see how those all fall under design, but they're independently linked. And then, of course, then you go down to construction and you break it down even more. You can see how they overlap. And then with the milestones, all projects are going to have milestones. We started off with a kickoff meeting, maybe some deliverables. Maybe you've got some things being delivered. Maybe you have just a goal set, in the middle for, maybe a midpoint kickoff. And then also you want to make sure that we define when the project's, coming to an end. So those milestones are going to be significant achievements in order to track our progress. And then you got the resource allocation. Team members assignment. We talked about one of the things that we do in the planning stages. We assign team members different tasks. This is where you might be able to, if you're bringing in subcontractors, or you're assigning a particular, depending on what it is, just assigning a team member. And then, as you can see, as we move across the chart, we're going to track our progress. That kind of clearly defining our timelines. And as we do this, we always want to make sure that we're keeping up on this, because these can change, and we make those adjustments accordingly, and make sure that we, some weeks, some Gantt charts will only be 3 weeks, and you'll break it down per day. So the time scale is important, as this one is, month 1, 2, 3. It could be week 1, 2, and 3. So.
All right, so if you don't want to use Dan's fancy Gantt chart, use the PERT method, project evaluation and review technique. So basically, it's a graphical representation of the project's timeline. This can be, something you just put together on a Word document, Excel document, or whatever, just to give you a visual representation of your project's timeline and starting to put some of that information together. You can see in this example here that there's some numbers under some of these. Those are just numbers that you would assign to them that would basically tell you, as the 3 are represented down here, as far as if it's the optimistic, expected, or pessimistic time that we're working on. With the optimistic time, that's obviously the least amount of time that you would, or best case scenario, that you would expect for a project. Obviously, we never communicate that timeline. We really, when we're doing communications of timelines, we communicate the pessimistic time, which is the worst case scenario in healthcare. But the expected time is the best estimated time or most likely scenario as well, and then the pessimistic, like I mentioned. So has anybody ever used the PERT technique? We've all probably have if you've done some project management. You may not have used the numbers, but all right.
So next we want to get that communication plan in there. And you know, as well as everyone here, communication is key. So you want to set this in place before the kickoff. And with that, you're looking at the updates. How often do we meet? What problems or concerns or risks did we run into? Designs or documentation review before the, and then deliverables, as we mentioned, do we have something coming in, or are we looking at something different other than that? So communication, as everyone knows, is key and a big part of any project.
All right, so our next group discussion, we're going to kind of transition into risks and project risks. So what strategies can manage or reduce risks when working on a project in a healthcare facility? Now, this could be construction, non-construction. So what strategies or what techniques would you use to reduce risk on a project? Again, group discussion.
Do a risk assessment before the project.
Risk assessment, yes, very
Yeah.
good. We have many risk assessments, don't we? That we could do depending on the project.
Anybody ever use ATG?
NICRA, PICRA. All those different types of risk assessments. But yeah, that's basically what we're looking for is as we're, starting a project, looking at those risks, and we're going to get into this now with some of those tools that we have used. Many of you have used, just not thinking of right at the moment.
So as Ben said, we want to assess the project's risks. And I mentioned ATG because that's the one that I use here at Huntersville. We used to use a kind of like a binder with some of the construction managers, but with that, we still did every one of these. The PICRAs, the pre-construction risk assessment, the ICRA, infection control risk assessment. We sat in, we brought in our IP person and kind of went through where is the projects being, completed. Is there patient risks? Is there, risk to our team members? And then with those, we also run into the ILSMs. This MRI project right now, we have an ILSM in place. Well, we don't any longer, but we were blocking hallways on the first floor. So we kind of talked about it early on, and come up with a mitigation plan. First, for the older facilities, which I do not run into any of this, but asbestos mitigation, that's huge. We want to make sure we're sending all of our team members home with nothing additional at the end of the day, along with that mold remediation, above ceiling, hot work permits, and any other safety considerations that we're running into. So there's a lot of things out there that we got to consider.
So the failure mode and effects analysis, FMEA, I've used this model a few different times. It is much more of analytical, I guess you could say, and involves the team as you're putting it together to identify and mitigate, those potential failures or potential risks. They talk about failure modes and effects, but it's really the risks associated with it and mitigation, but obviously those effects that it may have. So project managers prioritize the risk based on their severity, probability, and detectability. That allows the teams to focus on addressing the most critical and impactful failure modes or risks first. So on the next one, so this is kind of a process flow of how it works. Just like with any risk assessment, you identify your potential failure modes or risk points that you have in the project. Really, you're documenting all these, and we'll give you a kind of what that looks like here on the next one. But analyze each one of those failure modes, and project objectives for that. But then you also assign severity, based on what those risk points are, those failure modes are. You might, and then you give them some numbers. I've seen where people, and I've done this in the past when I've done this, based on the severity, you assign the numbers, certain numbers to them so that you can calculate the risks. And then based on those high risk calculations, you prioritize those and put your mitigation efforts into play. So this is an example, if you're looking at considering a new fire suppression system installation in a high-rise hospital project. Okay, and this is kind of how it's laid out. So you've got the project team, they're doing a thorough analysis on the installation process. So what are our potential risks? That could be include equipment, component failures, incorrect installation, inadequate testing, or unforeseen site condition. So what are some of the effects? The team looks at the project objectives and overall hospital operations. These effects could include delays in the system activation during a fire, water damage, non-compliance with regulatory requirements. So what are our failure modes based on that? So the failure mode could lead to patient harm or significant property damage. Is assigned a high severity rating. So that's one example. In contrast, a failure mode with a low likelihood of occurrence receives a lower occurrence rating. So if it's not going to have an impact on a patient, and it may just cause some slight water damage or something. So then you prioritize those so that you can focus on those high risk failure modes. The risks posing the greatest threat to patient safety, property damage, and project schedule are given priority attention. Then obviously, as with any risk assessment, you put your mitigation in place. So the team decides to conduct a comprehensive testing and inspection and provide staff training on system operations, maintenance, and establish contingency plans for an emergency response based on those failure modes. Does that make sense to everybody?
All right, now that we've got the planning phase completed, now we're going to move to phase number 2, which is that execution. This is when we get the hands on the ground and the feet moving, and we start managing, processes and timelines. We start managing costs. Is everything staying within budget? And then the documentation on it. So as we're doing this and we're managing and we're documenting and monitoring all this information, it's going to help us keep on schedule. It's going to avoid those conflicts. And then, as we mentioned, the change, it will let us kind of pivot and adjust a little bit. And I know that everybody in here has always run into that, just a little bit of a change in moving around with any project.
So as Dan was saying, we've started our project now. So now if we've done all of our upfront work correctly, then we can just manage the process as we go through. Obviously, we have talked about and established a good communication plan and make sure we're following that, providing updates, having our project meetings, whatever the case may be based on that plan. Avoiding scheduling conflicts. In healthcare, that is difficult to do. There's many factors there. We'll talk about some of that. But, doing your best based on the work you put in to manage those. And obviously perform our quality indicators, avoid project scope creep, as Dan talked about, and pivot and adjust as needed to make sure that we're staying on track so that we can finish this thing on time.
So we talked about the kickoff meeting and, status meetings. And as we go through this, we always want to provide the most accurate information. I'm currently finishing up a project here with our pharmacy where we're adding a pre-cool unit to help us with our humidity. At first, we were just kind of giving small updates, but as we move through the project, our status meetings had kind of changed a little bit based on need. So they wanted more information. They wanted, more updates. So we did that. And then also with that being said, we kind of helped ourselves do with many of us on there and this project moved through, we actually had, 3 heads better than one scenario. So we were able to kind of brainstorm a little bit. We had a problem, getting the unit on top of the roof. We had to readjust. We had to bring public safety in, which wasn't in the scope to begin with. So, just communication, those status meetings, they were very, very beneficial.
Change management. It seems inevitable, at least to me in healthcare, because I'm not sure that I ever had a project where there wasn't some level of change as we went through that you've had to manage, or that I've had to manage with projects. So it's anything that impacts your project, your processes, your structures, your tasks, all that sort of stuff. So being able to manage that, having your plan in place, so that you can communicate that to the team, so that they know how to react as those changes occur. Ties into some of those meetings Dan was talking about, so that as at those status meetings, you can talk about any changes or, scope creep, budget changes, delays, all those sort of things.
And as Ben mentioned, we've all had project changes. I'm just mentioned, lifting that small unit to the roof with a crane, how we had to do that. So we want to always look at the conditions, throughout the project. Where do we need to move this thing? What risk are we taking by moving locations for this crane? And by continuously monitoring it and keeping up to date, we get that communication already set. And as you know, as things move, there's different risks. This was a small project, and as you get into more complex, larger projects, you're probably going to have to do this a little bit more often. And just if you monitor it and keep up on it, things will get back in line and keep on track.
The closeout phase of a project is just as important as the rest, and sometimes these things do get missed historically here at Novant. I've missed some myself, when I've done closeout for projects. So it's important to make sure that we're following a certain process when we're doing closeout of projects. Ensuring, obviously that we're compliant with our code requirements, depending on if the project that you're doing entails that, or commissioning of projects. Inventory and drawings, that's something that always seems to drag on for a closeout of a construction project, and that we've struggled with in the past, at least I have. Invoices, accounting, make sure we get those final payments in. Punch lists also are very critical at the closeout phase. So
all right, so we're going to go through a couple of scenarios. The first one being that budget buster. And I know I've run into this just recently with a different project. But this one here, the load from a cooling tower replacement project is too much for the existing roof to withstand. So a lighter custom aluminum frame will be used instead of the stainless steel. The original foundation cannot support the additional weight. The cost of the aluminum frame is 2.5 times the original of the stainless steel option. All right, so of the options listed, what is the best course of action? A, determine how the project contingency funds can cover the additional cost and request more capital funding if necessary. B, move forward with a new quote. The hospital can't operate without the new cooling tower. C, defer the project until next fiscal year and submit a new capital project request with a revised budget. Or D, replace the roof to support the heavier load. Anybody want to take a shot at this?
Hey,
That was Matt. A, that's kind of where I was going. Anybody else?
yeah, I agree.
All right, so we're going to determine how much the project contingency funds can cover the additional cost and request more capital funding if necessary.
Why did you pick that one and not any of the other options?
Well, so I mean, if it looks like you're going to be over or something unexpected's come up, you always need to figure out how much contingency you got. I mean, that's easier than trying to replace a whole entire roof system or, I mean, I guess you could potentially push it off to next year, but I know we don't like doing that if we can avoid that. So trying to figure out what contingencies in the budget would be the easiest, I would think. And if we need more money, asking for more capital would be easier.
I feel time and condition of the equipment can help determine that answer. I'm almost leaning towards B. Based on that, what I just said, if it's a bad chillers in really bad shape, and it's the truth, the hospital can't operate without the new cooling tower.
Brian, did you have something to add?
Do we know what the choice D, do we know the price difference between the new frame and the roof replacement? What that price difference is? Do we know for sure that would be more expensive than the new aluminum frame?
I would imagine so, just because more structural elements. So when I say replace the roof, that's probably going to be the structural elements of the roof, you know, the decking and any additional bracing and maybe additional probably beams in this case. That might be required, not just like the roof material. So for that reason, I would say the cost of a frame
Is the cheaper option.
cheaper option.
Yeah, okay.
Melissa, what do you think?
Sorry, I had to find my unmute. I have more of a question. So how does it work in the hospitals with these infrastructure projects and the allocation of the funds and that I don't have a full understanding of that, and I feel like a lot of people on this call do. And to me, that would decide how I move forward on this.
Yeah, I can give you a rough
High level.
of how that works. But, you know, we put lists together of some of the needs that we have based on conditions, historical information, blah, blah, blah. You know, it gets submitted for review, and then there's a core team, Chip, Tim, and Matt, and some others that may be involved. You know, in prioritizing what they are, they get high level numbers. This goes back to something I was saying, thrown at them, you know, for allocation.
Yep.
So fast forward a year, if it gets funded in the budget for capital, then those high level numbers are allocated for that project. But obviously we have some contingency as well, but those quotes are high level, they're a year old, and we haven't done any, you know, in most cases, you know, real work on hard quotes and design for that system replacement. So that's kind of how it works. Once the money's allocated, then you move forward with your project process. Does that
Thank
help?
you. Mm-hmm.
Brian's got his hand raised.
Yeah.
Yes, so my mentor is Jeff Bailey. So he gave me a little insight to some of the contingency type stuff and whatnot. And he also has maybe an inflationary cost per month that's built into it also. So if the project sits there a year, they've already built in some of that inflationary cost too in the formula.
Yeah, that's definitely Jeff's wheelhouse, you know, and he's got a lot of that stuff built for the projects and stuff that he does. So yeah, that's helpful for sure. But again, even the inflation aspects of it are projections, you know, that we're never sure. But
Any other thoughts on this one?
All right, good discussion.
all right, our second scenario, the schedule shuffle. So we've got the carpentry shop behind schedule once again. The framing for the 5th floor renovation project will be delayed by at least a week. So the painters are scheduled to start drywall and paint tomorrow. This project includes a new imaging center and operating suite that will generate significant revenue for the hospital. This area must open as quickly as possible. So of our options listed below, what's the best course of action? A, call a meeting with the carpentry and paint supervisors to determine if the work can be phased into sections. Delay the project so the painters can start with the framing when it is complete. Hire a temporary crew and have the carpentry shop work overtime to meet the current schedule, or wait to see how far the carpenters progress when the painters arrive. What would you do? Matt Daniel.
I'd probably call a meeting with the carpentry and paint supervisors, see what their timeline looks like, and if I don't like their timeline, then hire a temporary crew.
Very good, very good. I'm kind of in the same boat on that one too. Any other thoughts? Anybody would just want to wait and see how it goes? D. No takers. Okay. All right.
All right, scenario 3. We're going to go to plant problems. We've never had this happen, I can guarantee it. A chilled water system upgrade is underway in the central utility plant. It's a performance contract project where the project team will be paid based on the energy savings produced by the upgrades. The hospital's plant manager is adamant a specific control valve is exclusively used for the new system. The valve is manufactured only in China and has a 12-week lead time. This lead time is more than the project team estimated, and it will impact the financial terms of the project. They recommend a different valve type. All right, so the options. A, conduct a project team meeting as soon as possible to evaluate the options. B, go with the plant manager's preference since they will be the one to operate the system. C, go with the project team's recommendations. It's their performance project. Or D, choose the valve with the lowest cost. What will you do?
I say A.
A.
All right, Matt, why A?
There could be a good reason that the plant manager wants this specific valve that the project team may not be aware of. And there may be other options that they could go with that would reduce the lead time for the valve to show up.
Mm-hmm. Melissa?
Yeah, I totally agree with that. I think this is one where it's important to bring the team together to collaborate, go over the options, even if you end up making a decision one way or another without the consent, but to have that, the education and the why behind it before making a choice like this is ideal.
Exactly. Anybody gonna go with the lowest cost?
Okay. Very good. So number 4, policy integration challenges. Y'all may know that as we joined New Hanover, we went through this. So the UC policy integration for New Hanover project involves reviewing and integrating all corporate EOC policies with New Hanover's existing policies. The goal is to adopt or modify the corporate policies to include New Hanover specific comments. So this project has been ongoing for over a year and is still incomplete. So of the options listed, what will give us the best course of action? Conduct a comprehensive project review meeting with all stakeholders to assess progress and identify bottlenecks. Allocate additional resources or extra help to speed up the process without compromising quality. Regularly update stakeholders on progress and develop a realistic timeline for completion. Or implement a policy integration task force to streamline the process and ensure the timely adoption of policies. We'll say that some of these have been done. But what are your thoughts? Ryan,
I like B and D.
B and D. Why do you like B and D?
Well, if you allocate additional resources, you're already behind. Well, I don't know if you're behind, but it's been going on for a year. So if you put some more people in it, you might can get it complete and get to a resolution. And then if you also have a integration team that can streamline it, that will also get you to your end goal.
Yes.
Mhm.
Yeah, I don't necessarily disagree, but I will say that just because this is a real scenario that happened, they did on the onset in trying to make this happen. They implemented a policy integration task force, a group of people that regularly work on policies to try and get this completed. So, but they've run into barriers. So, and it's still going on and still incomplete. Steve,
I mean, I like the first one. I don't know if it has to be a huge meeting, but I think you have to do some planning and meeting to find out what the problems are before you start throwing resources at it. I mean, maybe a task force does help, but maybe with the problems that are identified, that's not the right way to move forward.
yeah, I think that the first step to your point in addressing this is conduct a comprehensive project review meeting with all stakeholders. So that'd be the first course of action. And then based on that information, you know, maybe it is allocating additional resources or implementing a different task force or things like that. But if you all recognize or were paying attention with all of these scenarios, apart from all the correct answers being A, they were all about bringing the team together and having a discussion about the situation and then making your decision.
And I figured after a year, we had already done that. Be my guest.
We would hope so. We would hope we had. But unfortunately, in this real scenario, there's been several meetings, you know, and there's been several task force and it's still ongoing, but. Break time. Yay. All right, come back here in 10 minutes. So it is 9:49. So 9:59. We will come back together.
Hey, Dan,
Yes, sir.
did they do that, the wireless upgrade at your facility?
No, I'm not even sure what the WILES upgrade is.
I thought they said they'd already done it with you. They're updating all the wireless network stuff.
Oh, yes, the switches. Yes. We didn't, it wasn't any wireless thing. It was all the switches in the IT closets.
Oh, okay, they made this sound like it was the routers and everything.
No, mine wasn't. They were all the switches that were all the IT, switches are located in the IT closets. You know, they got those, it was, if they didn't physically upgrade them. I think what they did is they upgraded the, um, I guess the software that supports them.
Yeah.
and everything went really, really well, except the MOB. The MOB, there were some things that, we had that didn't come back. Instead of telling us that they didn't come back, they waited for us to call them and say, hey, this isn't working, which was an issue because one of them was a nurse call.
Yeah, that ain't good.
No, it was not.
Yeah, I guess this is a gas switch too, but I guess I was confused because they said I gotta switch out ceiling tiles for 2x4s for 2x2s. I don't know why that would matter in the hallways if they're in the IT rooms.
So actually, you may be on a different project because they do have those new wireless routers that they're using.
Yeah,
It's a 2x2 ceiling tile, and they're mounted in a metal ceiling tile.
gotcha.
Yeah, that's not what I just went through. I went through the switch upgrade.
Because I got a lot of 2x4s and they're like kind of demanding that I make the switch. I'm like, I guess I'm paying for this. I don't. So I don't know how many I gotta convert.
Wow. Okay. That's interesting.
I got a meeting with Bill Lovell today after this about it. So,
Okay.
but it's just when you read the text, they're pretty demanding. They're not really asking for help. They're telling.
Isn't it the way it works nowadays?
Yeah, I love being barked at.
Yeah, they I wish they would go. I've seen them. Matter of fact, I was at Kernersville on Friday and they have them. And then I think that Rowan had them when we were meeting last month. And they look really good. They're not hanging from the grid any longer. They're actually 2x2 tiles.
Yeah, that would give a cleaner look.
Mm,
Yeah, they're trying to get it ready because it has to match the tower when it opens.
okay.
Go ahead and do the building now that exists.
Now, do you have options that, where you have the 2x4 tiles? Are there 2x2s in the area also?
There's some like going down the middle of the hallway in the basement, there are 2x4s, but along the edge, they're 2x2s. But I don't have any of those. I don't have any of that grid or tile to replace it with, so I gotta order some. I guess it just depends on how much they need.
Okay, yeah. If you need some, I've got some. I don't know when your project starts. And trying to get some supplies here nowadays are, challenging to say the least.
Yeah.
So I do have some of the grid. I don't know what color grid you have. Mine's white.
Yeah, it's white, but it's old, so it ain't gonna match.
Mm,
It's more yellow than white.
I got you.
All right, yeah, I'll reach out to you offline.
Okay.
Thank you.
All right. I don't know about the rest of you guys, but I welcome that break. I had to get up and move and get some water. So welcome back. So learning objective number 2, we're going to go in some methodologies, being agile and waterfall. So, a waterfall, excuse me, methodology is more of a logical order type, approach to project delivery. Think about a linear progression as you see in the dominoes. You push that one domino over and it just continues down the line. Whereas a methodology of Agile is it's flexible, it's adaptable, and it delivers by incremental short, burst, or what we call sprints.
So with these two methods, don't let the terminology throw you off either. You've done some of these before, but these are the specific terminology. So the flexibility aspect with each of these, with a waterfall method or model, it's less flexible, so it's very phased, very sequenced, very linear, as Dan was saying, so you've got it planned, so that as one phase is completed, then you move to the next phase, and it's hard to change that stuff up. With the agile method, it's highly flexible so that you can adjust your schedules, you can adjust the project and all aspects of it as you move along, based on how it's formatted.
So each of these approaches kind of give a little bit of a different input, whereas the waterfall, you don't have a lot of input from your stakeholders. They'll see it start and then really they'll see it finish. Whereas an agile project, you're going to get a lot of interaction because it's, incremental. You can have that interaction with your stakeholders as you progress through the project.
Also with these from a risk standpoint, with the waterfall method, you're really trying to identify and manage those risks on the onset of it. Put your plans in place for what those risks will be. You've got them all lined out and address them as they occur. Where with the agile method, you identify and manage those risks throughout the project. So again, because of its flexibility, if you run into risks, you're able to address those, you're able to, have a more proactive approach as you're working through those risks of the project.
So as we talked about, excuse me, in the delivery approach, the end user involvement, that waterfall, because it's so, linear, there's less involvement for that end user. So there's no collaboration. It's, you pretty much, when you're delivering the product, that's when they get kind of involved. That agile, it emphasizes that interaction with your stakeholders through the entire project, gives them a little bit of, I guess, input among, gets them involved and, kind of maybe help see an oncoming problem or changes that need to be occurred. So.
And everybody's favorite part, documentation of the projects. Again, with the waterfall, it's very heavy in the documentation. It's phased out. You've got your deliverables, all your required documentation, design specs, test plans. All those are, lined out sequential and move through the project. Where your agile, project method, while documentation is still important, you're really trying to focus on the functional outcomes of the project, and then obviously making sure you have your required documentation, but it's not as focused or as it is in the waterfall method.
All right. So what factors should be considered when determining what project delivery method to be used, whether it be the waterfall or the agile? Anyone?
This would be another group discussion too.
Scotty.
I'd say for the waterfall, you need to make sure that your plan is, indefinite, rigid. So, everything's covered that way. If you have a situation come up, you've already got a contingency plan for that. Keep you on track.
All right. So what kind of factors, I guess, is what I need to kind of consider? Let's see, would timeline be one of the things that we want to consider?
Yeah.
A waterfall or an agile? What else?
Steve, you got your hand raised next, I think.
I think how invasive it will be to daily operations could be a factor. If you got something that's kind of out of sight, out of mind, then you can kind of just let them go with it. But if you got something that's going to be affecting daily operations on a regular basis, you're probably gonna have to fluctuate and flex to where at times, depending on volume and stuff.
Yeah, I think that would qualify into that project scope scenario. So yeah, most definitely. Melissa.
Yeah, you kind of said it, Dan. I feel like it's scale, complexity, and timeline that decides the deliverables.
Most definitely. Excellent. So we're going to do a couple little scenarios. One is we're actually doing here in Huntersville is a room renovation. We're doing it in labor and delivery. So a patient room in mother baby is due for a major, remember, major renovation. This is a project that will be funded with operating expense budget approved in the previous fiscal year. Most of the work will be handled by an in-house team, but some specialty work will have to be contracted out. Using the Agile project methodology, identify the steps and teams needed to complete this project. All right, so in a group discussion now, what scope items could be included in a major patient room renovation? All right, Steve, I know you're going through this also, so Scotty.
You need to assess it, see if you need an ICRA or the picker for the unit that you're working on.
Yes, definitely the pickers and the ICRAs are definitely going to be in consideration. What about the scope of the project, though? What are we going to be looking at?
The degree of demolition?
Could be, yep.
So one of the problems we had with ours at Matthews is the scope kept changing and the financial demands kept changing, and it actually ended up getting to the point where we had to stop the project. And
Yeah, the good old scope creep.
yeah.
So kind of like what you're talking about there. I mean, I'm sure it started out as just painting walls and redoing floors. And then it kind of materialized in something else.
Yeah, it changed the permits we needed, it changed the people doing the work, the cost changed, so we actually had to stop, regroup. So it's kind of, the project transferred over to different leadership, myself and the previous manager, and so there was a lot of complications, so we had to kind of go back to the drawing board, replan it, and we're gonna go back to it when the med surge and the new tower opens.
All right. So when you were taking over this, what were things that you were considering doing?
Initially, it was just like you said, flooring, paint, ceiling tile. Then it started getting on to adding Uvidion technology, more electrical work that was initially planned for. The budget that was approved then wasn't approved. It was taken out of my budget, operations budget, so the funding wasn't there.
Yep.
So it was a good disaster to learn from.
Did you do anything with the bathrooms?
Yeah, so there was do we spend the money to completely renovate them, or do we just try to clean them up as good as we could? So initially it was acid clean the tile, repaint it, new ceiling. Ideally we go in there and take out the tubs because we don't want something the patients have to step over. We want something they can walk into.
Yep.
So for when we revisit this project, we're looking at that as, do we want to implement that also and add to the scope again?
Now, did you change any med gas outlets?
We did not initially. It's back on the drawing board, back on the table. That'll add scope and permitting also.
Exactly.
It could change the way it's funded. So from
So
operation to capital.
Yep. So as you can see from this, as we're looking at a major renovation, it could have started out as a small, scale patient room renovation, but as it materializes into a major, we've got several things to consider. Like we talked about the flooring, the ceiling tiles, the plumbing, the paint, medical gas outlets, replacing furniture. I know in Huntersville, we have a daybed that we had to remove and we're putting the new sofas in. Like Steve mentioned, the new Uvidion, which requires that new 55-inch monitor. Can you hang that 55-inch monitor in the current space? I know in Huntersville we could not. So there's a lot of things to consider when you're defining that scope.
Dusty, you had your hand raised.
Yeah, I know with some of the projects we've had here at Brunswick, the hardest part is trying to figure out the downtime of the room. I've come across, oh yeah, well I've done it in a week and it ends up taking 3 and things like that. I think play a big factor. especially in the smaller hospitals.
Yeah, and that's where that, that Gantt chart, or like, Ben was mentioning, that PERT, chart could help out as you align things to kind of make sure that all the groups are not overlapping, and moving through the process really cleanly.
Yeah,
Yeah.
agree.
Yep. And a lot of times we just kind of wing it. I understand. We think small projects are good. Or easy anyway. All right. Good discussion. And as we were talking about, here's a list of things that we could definitely consider. We didn't talk about the whiteboards, removing unnecessary equipment or signage, wall protection. I know we talked about wall painting, but there's this scope can, as Steve has learned, it could definitely grow and grow and grow.
So after you've gotten your basic scope of work, or an extensive list of your scope of work, you can break each of those tasks down further, so that you can more clearly define them, so that you can manage them a little bit better, assign times to them or risk points to them as well. Or you may be even looking at rooms specifically and the scope in each room. I know in some of the projects that I've done at Forsyth, when we've done the room refreshes or aesthetic upgrades or whatever you want to call them, some rooms have had some of the fixtures already replaced, or the countertop was already replaced, or there may be the flooring was already replaced in one. All those pieces in the scope, even if it's just room specific, impact your schedule as you start putting it together. So we're going to look at painting walls as an example. Yeah, so when you're trying to break that down, as I said, and you're looking to be able to assign times and putting your schedule together, preparing the walls for painting, cleaning, sanding, applying the primer, applying the main coat, applying the finishing coat, determining how many coats of paint you got to put on the wall. And then look at what your deliverable is, the painted walls with an even color and even texture, making sure that they are done adequately. And then your acceptance criteria. So this is you as a project manager and what your criteria is for accepting that once they're done. No visible patches or streaks, paint color matches the specific requirements and standards. The walls are dry and free of drips and smudges. And there's crisp, clean lines, where you transition in those colors too.
Brian, you had your hand raised at the beginning of the slide. Was there something that you wanted to bring up?
It was kind of on the back end of the scope and stuff, so I know there's certain people that can control whether or not that scope gets pushed to a greater degree. But who generally would be the person? I know I've been in meetings with Jamie Feinauer, and she's like, this is what's going to happen. And nobody's trying to push it further, right? But so is it the project manager that really is tasked with wrangling everyone in and saying, no, guys, this is what we're doing? Or I know it goes back to that group meeting and discussion and everybody playing nicely together, but who really kind of is able to wrangle that in?
So as you mentioned, Brian, yeah, it definitely goes back to that collaborative group and budget. If you in my scenarios, I know that, originally we didn't have the budget to do a certain amount of work. So we kind of, like we talked about, we kind of removed a little bit of it just to get back in scope. Well, as the project was progressing, kind of like Steve, they realized we really wanted this. And it did end up being, for us, it was our president, of the hospital that said, we need to make this happen, and we will find the additional money. So we did that through some donations, some charity that we were able to get, some foundation money. So there's different ways, and there's many different answers to that question. And I think we've kind of all kind of run into something of that nature. I know Ben probably has done more of that, run into that scenario than anyone else with his previous assignments at Novant.
Yeah, like Dan was saying, it really does depend on the project. It could be that the project owner, has the final say on it. Some of that decision-making process you want to establish, when you have some of your first team meetings so that you know who has the final say. In a lot of the projects, it is that hospital president, that will have it, even if they're not initially involved in it, but then they become involved. They end up having some input on that. Some mega projects where there's board approval and things like that, it could be people from across different markets that have involvement on those decisions. A lot of them obviously are finance driven, and whether you can get that funding like Dan was talking about. But some of it as a project manager too, even if you have a Jamie Fineau or a Chad or somebody that's says this is how it's going to be, if you can make the argument of why something else would be better served to be done differently than what they're asking, then it's that discussion, where you're trying to persuade them to not go one way and go a different way as a project manager. Matt, I think you had your hand raised first.
Yeah, I was gonna say, trying to think, this might be a isolated incident, but I'm thinking of the Pender project going on right now. That project is kind of framing the scope of that work. You open up a wall and it's like, oh, we didn't expect this, so then the scope increases, and air quality tests don't pass, and then the scope increases even more. So it's kind of weird that the project's driving that scope.
Yeah, that one's unique for sure, and I've been in some similar situations, but not probably to that scale, as the Pender issue going on right now. But yeah, a lot of it, and it happens in many projects too, where you're starting some construction, you tear into a wall, and then you find mold, or you find asbestos, or whatever the case may be, or you find pipes you have to relocate, so the projects can definitely, change like we talked about. Scope can increase, based on information we don't have, but you find out when you're in the middle of a project. That's a lot of reason we put contingency funds and, to try and use that to offset some of those unforeseen things.
Yeah, I mean, unfortunately, like Ben says, that's the conditions assessment, that you may not be aware of until you open those up, and that's where the contingency funds, like Ben mentioned, will come into play.
Steve?
I was just going to say, well, my situation, I learned that you can't always necessarily trust your leader either, because they had no qualms about trying to manipulate the situation when we had a transfer in leadership and project manager, and they conveniently forgot that why the 2-week project became an 8-week project per every 4 rooms, and it was because the scope had increased so much, and they tried to kind of manipulate the situation that maybe I didn't know the history of the project and how much it had grown. And so we had to have, thankfully Mike had filled me in before he hired me here, so I was able to kind of push back on that and set the record straight, so to speak.
Yeah, that's where some of that documentation comes in very handy too, and making sure we have that historical information, on how the project starts and the initial requests and, so on.
But yeah, I learned they'll pull any card to kind of get what they want faster. So
yeah.
So continuing with the refined project scope breaking down of tasks, you think about the flooring, subtask. What are we looking at doing in the flooring as we're, doing this planning stage? Or we're going to remove it. We're definitely going to prepare the subfloor, because obviously you may be removing carpet, or you may be removing a vinyl that just the under portion is it's no longer any good and the material won't adhere. Then we want to look at the new install, the finishing touches, and install the base. So our deliverable on that would be installing this install floor that is durable and aesthetically pleasing, whether it's tile, vinyl, no matter what it is. The acceptance criteria would be the flooring material is installed according to manufacturer specifications, which is big. Obviously, if you've ever done the rubberized flooring, that is huge, and be careful. The floor's surface is level and clean from cracks and gaps. In the MRI room that we just did, it was really important for the room to be level. So that was a huge criteria for me. The flooring transitions smooth and with adjacent surfaces. And then you can do the same thing with the receptacle replacements. Do the survey for existing and receptacles and wiring. Are we putting new ADA or not ADA, but tamper resistant receptacles in? What kind of materials? Disconnect the old ones. If we do this with shutting down a breaker, are we affecting any other rooms? Install new outlets and wiring. Test functionality and safety. So obviously the deliverable would be, we definitely want to install UL rated, hospital rated, and tamper resistant receptacles. The acceptance criteria that we are installing correctly, being properly grounded, located at the proper heights, whether it be the 18 inches or 42, depending on what we're plugging in or where the stakeholder feels that they need to be. And then the electrical connections are secure and free from any exposed wires.
So along those same lines, then we're looking at our ADA compliant fixture installation subtasks. We want to identify the required ADA compliant safety items, whether they're grab bars, accessible toilets, or whatever the case may be. Procure ADA compliant fixtures and accessories, install blocking in the wall to support the grab bars, or maybe even you got those seats they put in the shower sometimes that most of the time fall out of the wall because people don't put the blocking in correctly, and we have water leaks and stuff. Install your grab bars and other safety items according to the guidelines, test accessibility and functionality. And then with our deliverables being bathroom equipment with ADA compliant safety features. And then our acceptance criteria, the grab bars are securely mounted, capable of supporting specified weight. The total height and configuration meet the ADA requirements. And the bathroom layout allows sufficient maneuvering space for wheelchair users.
All right, so we've got all that broken down. Next, we're going to identify the project team. So as a group discussion now, so for this room renovation scenario, who could serve as a project team member? Include interdisciplinary team members who have a stake in the project's success. So who are those team members that we need to consider?
Leaders in the building,
Which leaders?
nurse managers, CNO, president.
Who else?
Brian.
Your engineering team, they always get roped into helping
Yep.
to some
Yep.
degree. Sorry about
Most
that.
definitely. Who else? Matt.
So we got some patient floor renovations going on right now, and one team I did forget to include in all the info was the kitchen staff bringing food to patients, where a stairwell's got an ALSM on it right now. And the elevator, they're having to go in a different route, and that's one team that I forgot to include.
No, that definitely would impact that particular project. So if we stay on just the room renovation, who else might we definitely have to look into? Steve.
Just the team members using the room,
the nurses, the CNAs. I know they had a lot of comments on ours. And
Okay. What about biomed? You think we need to notify them?
mhm.
What kind of equipment's in the room that needs to be removed, maybe? IT, maybe? And someone mentioned the hospital directors and other leadership, so most definitely there.
No, but
And
you
the one that
mentioned-
I forgot here was design and construction. Because, I'm not the interior designer and I'm not very good at putting colors, and they wanted to change colors and they changed flooring. So at Huntersville, we had to reach out to design and construction, and Terrell was a huge asset on that because she came in with all the new flooring colors and all the wall colors and everything else that we changed. And also the furniture. She helped tremendously with the furniture. So, that's definitely somebody we don't want to forget.
You didn't want to pick your own colors, Dan?
No, my wife does not allow me to do that, and there is a reason. My daughter went years ago she dressed herself and she had polka dots and plaid with some purple shoes on, and we went to the doctor's office. And my wife, the first thing that she did when we got back was, please tell me you did not let her go that way. So, Justin,
We need to include infection prevention as well.
most definitely. You're going to need that ICRA, most definitely. Brian,
I don't know if anybody said like bed placement. You don't want to try to put a patient up in that room when it's being renovated.
yep, we definitely need to, bed placement or house supervision to work with us. Yes, most definitely. How about the EVS team? We need to worry about them. I know our policy with infection prevention is that, we kind of clean and then the EVS does a final clean. So definitely have to work with them. Anybody else? Great discussion, guys and gals.
Yeah, that was a pretty good list. So then we've got the team. We want to verify the budget through new cost estimates. So we may have, when we started this and we were thinking about getting this room renovation project going, some high level numbers were thrown around. So now you want to verify what this actual budget's going to be. So obviously you want to look, if you're doing some of this work internally, some of your material costs, some of your labor costs, and then if you're using subcontractors or contractors, what their quotes are, making sure we include IT, also making sure that we have some contingency, as we've talked about, depending on the dollar amount usually of the project, depends on how much contingency you add, but it's generally between that 5 to 10%. FF&E, permitting fees, anything else that may need to be included with this. Also if you're just getting started and you're planning for it for next year, as we've talked about, making sure that you build in some of those inflation costs or escalation in costs, if it's going to be a period of time before you get started, because in most cases now material quotes are only good for 30 days. Quotes from contractors the same, so anything past that, it's hard to tell. So you got to build in some of those inflation costs with it. I think I just went through all of that.
Yep. So as a team, we want to address all the risks that we may run into. Obviously with a room renovation, we want to mitigate, the risks. We want to identify those potential hazards. We can do that better as a group and kind of maybe develop plans and, outline those mitigation strategies. We always run into these regulatory compliance. We're the second most highest rated regulated industry out there. So we definitely have a lot of those that come into place. Patient and staff, where do they fall? So group discussion. So what risk assessments apply to this room renovation project? What should we be risk assessing?
In the chat, Matt put ICRA PICRA. Ryan put noise impact.
Most definitely. And that ICRA, like, we discussed, that's going to probably do those patient risks in our team member. And that PICRA is going to kind of outline some maybe utility shutdowns. So yeah, most definitely. Anybody else?
Matt Kimler mentioned that for one of his projects with room renovations, they had an ALSM or ILSM in place for that, depending on the room location.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
All right. So, sorry. As we were talking about with our risk assessments, we've got the PICRA. I will say first too, that your risk assessments should be done prior to finalizing your budget and your costs, because there can be some cost implications as you complete some of these risk assessments. If you have to put in, specific working hours, or you're addressing some of the risks identified, with vibration or noise that we have here, and you can only use rubber hammers, whatever the case may be, so I always want to make sure that all of my risk assessments are done prior to finalizing my scope, or my cost rather, for the project. So PICRA, pre-construction risk assessment, that addresses all risks. ICRA as well, our infection control risk assessment that looks at all of our infection risks. ILSM, interim life safety, fire watch, usually required for this type of project, because you're going to have some fire alarm impairment. Special locking permit, should you have any special locking in the area, or that you're modifying, adding, or whatever. Lockout, tag out, which you should be doing anytime you're working with our electrical systems or HVAC systems. Hot works might be involved as well, depending on your scope. Obviously, our above ceiling work permit, utility shutdowns as mentioned, and then our communication plan and our documentation that we would have for those.
So we talked about the agile project management using sprints back in the very beginning of this section, and if you remember the picture down below, it was a track and field. It had the lanes for a track event. So you think about our sprints as a kind of a baton race. So we're going to develop those sprints in increments. And as we complete one, we're handing off to the next. And that's going to help us, keep everything balanced as the team moves, through it. So we want that cadence, to kind of roll through. If you would say, it's just think of it as a baton race.
Yeah, so with the use of these sprints and establishing them, there's several factors obviously, but really we're trying to put some time frame with it. So with specific duration, it can vary based on your scope of work, based on the availability of resources, and any task planning that may be involved with a project. All that has a impact on that sprint or that duration of time that you're allocating. Common sprint duration in agile project management is 2 weeks, but for a scenario like this one, 1 week sprints may be more suitable, to ensure frequent feedback and rapid progress.
So as we're doing this, we want to identify the prerequisites and then prioritize them accordingly. We definitely don't want, 2 people in there trying to do the same thing and getting in each other's way. So this has to be, kind of completed before others can start. So you think about your flooring guy. If he's in there trying to tear up the floor and you've got an electrician working above the ceiling installing new lights, that doesn't work together. So you want to make sure as you're completing these sprints, you align them and make sure that overall time frame doesn't overlap. And that will kind of help you with your balance workload and keeping everything moving smooth. Now, that's not saying that you may not have 2 trades in there at one time, but they're not going to overlap and get in each other's way.
With these sprints in this agile method, we want to have our frequent check-ins to make sure that we're staying on track. Make sure that there are some options too, where you can use some project management software to help track this, give you real-time information. I don't think there's any that I can think of that we currently use for any of our projects regularly. They might on the construction side. I'm not sure. We do want to make sure we have that clear communication with our team, report any issues or delays, as part of our check-in process. And then we want to regularly review and analyze our metrics, such as velocity, burn down, charts, and cycle time to assess project performance, which we'll talk about a little bit.
All right. So Ben mentioned, the metrics, velocity is defined as the measure of the amount of work a team can complete within a single sprint. We usually do this with what they call story points, which represents the effort required to complete the task. And then the burn down chart. It's a visual representation of the progress of the work of the sprint. It shows the remaining effort of the story point. And then the cycle time is defined as it measures the average time it takes to a task. Ooh, goodness gracious. To move from start to finish. Overall efficiency is the team in the workflow, and it identifies potential bottlenecks and areas for improvement.
All right, so story points, as Dan was mentioning, and again, some of these, some of this is new terminology, like we've said, and some of this we haven't used historically, but they are different techniques, methods, processes, that can be used. So we want to make sure that you're exposed to them. So with the story points as they tie in, understanding story points is key to estimating the work in agile projects. Start by explaining to your teams that story points measure the relative efforts of tasks, not just time. So it's how much effort you're putting into it, not just how much time you're putting in. The key is how these points scale against each other. So a task with more points should require proportionally more effort. To make this easier, you can use sequences like the Fibonacci series, or simple methods like the t-shirt sizing. These approaches help teams focus on comparing task sizes rather than getting overwhelmed by the numbers. So this is an example of a matrix. Obviously, you can see the points that are allocated on the left-hand side. which, that required effort, one, for example, it's minimum effort. Then as you go up, 13 being the maximum effort that you're putting in. Also considering time, task complexity, and risk or uncertainty. That's how you get to those numbers. So to calculate velocity, sum up the story points of all completed tasks in a sprint. So here is an example with installation of new flooring. Okay, so 1 story point. So obviously that's minimal effort and complexity, small standard size patient rooms, straightforward subfloor conditions, no additional considerations. So 1, that's minimum effort, easy. So 3 story points, you got moderate effort and complexity, large patient rooms. There might be some additional work to the subfloor. And then you've got some potential challenges with uneven subfloor conditions or obstacles. So that's a moderate. And then obviously 5 being significant, you got significant effort and complexity, specialized flooring, something we don't put in every day, extensive subfloor work and repairs, alterations, and then there's some regulatory requirements as well. So again, you're assigning those points, based on the effort being put in.
So our burn down chart, ideally, we want this to go in a downward motion. So I kind of relate this to, a PI project, and I'm sure a few of you guys have done that, in a trend line. Depending on what your PI project is, your trend line will show your progress. In an ideal burn chart, it's a downward. You're trying to reach that 0 point, which shows the task is completed. If you are running, your trend line or your burn down chart, and all of a sudden it starts leveling out or even moving upward, it may show, that you've got, either a potential delay or an obstacle that you need to address in order to get that 0 mark. You think about, the example here is 100 story points are remaining in a work. And as the sprint progresses, the chart should slope downward. You think about installing the floor, you put so many story points on removing the floor. And then you put so many story points on maybe the subfloor, leveling it out. And maybe all of a sudden now you've got more problems. Instead of 2 days, it's now 5 days that needs. So that would kind of show you a little bit of a delay. That's that plateau or that upward trend, because you're leveling out, you're showing a delay. And then obviously by the time you get that new flooring in, you're at that 0 point.
So cycle time can be calculated for individual tasks, user stories, or entire sprints. So, the time that you're taking to complete that whole task, so for example, Task A takes 3 days to complete for the moment it's started until it's marked as done. Task B takes 5 days. So the average cycle time for these 2 tasks, 3 + 5 divided by 2 is 4 days that the cycle time is for these 2 tasks. So by analyzing the cycle time, the project team can identify tasks or processes taking longer than they are expected to take. And obviously look at the root cause and what may need to be modified. So for example, if the cycle time for installing flooring consistently exceeds estimates, indicates a need for additional resources or process improvement, change in process, whatever it may be, to make sure that we're getting those completed on time.
All right. And my favorite, the Kanban chart, or board, should I say. It consists of columns representing different stages of work. So as you do in an agile methodology, you can divide this board into the following phases. Your backlog. This column represents all the tasks that need to be done for the project, but have not yet been assigned your sprint. So how long does it take? Your sprint planning. This column represents, it contains tasks that have been selected for current sprint during the sprint planning meeting. These tasks should be broken down into smaller subtasks. You remember how we did that, redefining everything, and breaking down those into the subtasks, the deliverables, and then the criteria. And then the in progress. These are tasks actively being worked on. This phase represents the team's current focus and helps visualize the workflow. The review and the quality assurance. Once the tasks are completed, they move into this column for the quality assurance. This is that acceptable criteria. This phase ensures the deliverables meet the required standards, which we've set, and before being considered finished. And then that most rewarding is that done column. These are the tasks that have been completed. This phase shows that sense of accomplishment, and they just that checklist. I mean, I know how I am with my checklist. It just kind of makes me feel good when everything's gone. I can remove it. It's done.
So with the Kanban board, I mean, you can make it as easy or as complex as you want. You can divide it into as many phases or as you want to. In the picture, you can see it's just sticky notes on whiteboards, that's broken down into phases. It can be that easy, and then as a task or something moves along, you move it from one board to the other. It's just a visual representation that allows the team to see what's going on, what status, what tasks, or if there's any bottlenecks or anything like that. We do want to make sure that you're having your regular stand-up meetings to review the board, make sure that everything is on track and where it needs to be. Make sure that you have that collaboration with the team. And then obviously discuss how the team can improve the project flow or add resources, as needed.
So scheduling impacts, timing, it's always a challenge. And what is the delay or cause the sprints to be rearranged? We can conduct that risk assessment early on to help possibly mitigate or kind of identify potential disruptions. Some proactive measures could be resource leveling, buffer management, and task prioritization.
So what are some factors that could impact our sprint schedules? Now this is our room renovation project like we've been discussing. So what are some factors that could impact our schedules? Not all at one time. Make sure you put your hand. Anybody? What if they didn't move the patients? Is my microphone broken?
Steve's got his hand.
Oh, hey, Steve.
Yeah, I mean, that was the biggest thing we had a hard time with, was not wanting to give up the rooms or being at capacity and not having any way to move the patients to get into the rooms. We ran into some issues with contractor. We had one contractor that had a family emergency, couldn't do the wall protection, and that delayed everybody else. Wife was admitted to the hospital in an emergency situation, so he was out 2 weeks. And then having contractors that will only work, during day hours. If they don't get their work done, that delays the guy coming in at night. So
Yep.
Scheduling conflicts, especially in a small room, we can only have really one vendor, maybe two at the same time.
Brian?
So through COVID, I know there was a big lead time on getting supplies. That just went through the roof. So that could definitely impact your schedule.
Absolutely. What about people that have not talked today? I can call on you if you'd like.
I have a sarcastic answer.
That's fine. I have those all the time.
Okay. well, we haven't paid our invoice and the vendor's not going to supply us with the material. So that's going to affect some schedules.
Get put on credit hold.
Yeah,
Yeah.
we have a project like that right now.
Yeah.
Few of them.
I was gonna say waiting on POs.
That's for sure. We're experiencing that currently. Anything else? All right, I'll call you out later then. So we've talked about most of these. So did the patients that need to be transferred get transferred before, and sometimes they don't. Were noise, odor addressed for impact on patients while the work was being performed? Again, where are risk assessments done, and did we address those? Was a barricade put up at the entrance of the room? Following our ICRA, making sure that all that stuff is complete. Project supplies, we just talked about, during COVID, we've had lots of challenges. Now we have challenges with getting PO numbers. So supply is always an issue. Was the work completed on time based on, the different phases and based on our schedule? Were there any unforeseen conditions discovered while performing the work? Do we have any scope creep that has delayed it? And inspections, inspections, they can be a wild card as well, depending on if we can get the inspectors in on time and then get them completed and passed. So these are just a few.
All right, so we've been talking about the agile methodology. Now we're going to move to the waterfall. So our project scenario is an air handler replacement. An air handling unit is serving a surgical suite is at its useful life and no longer performing efficiently. A capital project to replace it has been approved. Most of the work will be handled by a mechanical design build team. Using the waterfall methodology, identify the steps and the teams needed to complete this project.
So like we talked about before, first step is to define the project scope. Make sure that we have, just like we talked about with a room renovation project, an extensive list, of what the scope is going to need to be for this. So what's the scope of work for this AHU replacement project? What are some thoughts? What are some ideas? Who here has done an AHU replacement project before? That's 1, 2.
Come on, Casey.
4. Come on. Scope of work. We're replacing an air handler. I'm pulling teeth today. Come on.
Yeah.
Well, you need to replace it with something larger or equal, right? So you need to find out the specs of the current units.
Very good. Very good.
Nope.
Yes. Thank you, Seth.
This is a operating room, air handler unit. DHSR will have to be involved.
Yes.
Mm-hmm.
Very good. Gary, I'm going to call on you. Come on, Gary.
The time frame would be a big one for me. The length of the project, and are they going to use other rooms or temporary unit, that kind of stuff as well.
Yep. Very good. Those temporary units, we always seem to have to use those, make sure we're maintaining our humidities, temps, even when the spaces are unoccupied. What else? All right, I won't torture you anymore right now. I'll save it for later. Good answer. So I appreciate that discussion. So some of the things we want to conduct a site and condition assessment, obviously. So that, kind of like Seth was saying, you know, we want to replace the unit with something the same size or bigger. So that's part of that assessment. Determine the spatial requirements, the new equipment, design the new air handler unit, including sizing, airflow calculations, and so on. Develop the detailed equipment planning, or engineering plans rather, and specifications for the replacement. Solicit bids from qualified mechanical contractors and equipment suppliers. Select the vendors based on their expertise. And then process or procure the AHU associated ductwork piping, etc. And then we'll coordinate with the mechanical and design build team to schedule and execute the installation of the new equipment, conduct the equipment function testing and performance verification, provide the training to plant engineering, prepare operational manuals, maintenance schedules, as-built for some of that closeout documentation, conduct commissioning, complete all documentation, financial reconciliation and reports, and then make sure we had our final approvals and formally close out the project. So that's the scope, you know, in a nutshell.
All right. So as we did in the Agile methodology, we're going to break down these larger tasks into smaller ones. So we're going to look at, conduct a site and condition assessment of the existing air handler unit, chiller, and boiler systems. So as we did before, we're going to have our subtask. So we're going to break that down into site and condition assessment. So we're going to coordinate site with the engineering team, site inspection that is, escort the engineering design team throughout the facility, and provide original drawings and other documentation for the design team. And I found that, bringing them on site is very important because site conditions can always change, especially from the first to the last. So the deliverable on this one would be a site assessment report detailing equipment condition and spatial constraints. And then the acceptance criteria would be reports submitted within 1 week of the site visit, including photos, measurements, calculations, and observations.
Then we've got our engineering and design subtasks. You know, when they're involved, we're performing the load calculations and system sizing for the new AHU, verifying the design aligns with Novant Health's engineering standards. Sometimes that does get missed, and we want to make sure that they're following those standards. Verify design satisfies the ASHRAE standards and energy efficiency requirements, and preparing the detailed engineering drawings for the AHU installation. The deliverables for that would be the sizing calculations, equipment specs, CAD drawings, and then our acceptance criteria would be report reviewed and approved by plant engineering, and then the drawings finalized and signed off by the project manager. And then our procurement subtasks, issuing the RFPs from mechanical contractors and equipment suppliers, evaluate the vendor proposals and select the preferred suppliers, with our deliverables being the completed RFP document with the project specs, receiving the proposals and select the vendors, and then our acceptance criteria, the RFP sent to the qualified vendors within 1 week, and then the report reviewed and approved by the procurement team within 2.
All right, so as we move to the next one, we're breaking down the installation and construction scope. Obviously, we want to coordinate the equipment delivery and logistics. I know in Huntersville, we have a really small dock, so logistics is a very big part of that. Supervise on-site installation and construction activities. The deliverables would be equipment delivery schedule, installation plan, that daily progress report. Hopefully, if it's a surgical unit, it's not a really elongated process, but and then also inspection logs. So our acceptance criteria would be schedule finalized and communicated to stakeholders within the 1 week. Ensure reports are submitted daily and reviewed with the project manager. And then once we get that, we go to commissioning and testing. So if we break that down, we need to conduct functional testing of AHU, chiller, and boiler systems, verify operation of automation and controls technology. Our deliverable would be testing procedure and results report, controls programming and verification report. And then our acceptance criteria would be systems tested and results documented within 1 week. Issues log and resolutions documented as applicable, and then controls verified and signed off by mechanical engineer.
All right, so then we're breaking down our training and our handover scope. So we got to develop the training material, conduct the on-site training sessions with the plant engineering team or those others involved. Create the asset numbers for Works Hub. Make sure we're getting it into our work order system for and on schedule for PMs. So the deliverables, the training manual, training materials, and training attendance records. With our deliverables being the materials are reviewed and approved by the project manager, excuse me. The staff's trained and completed and competent rather in the new AHUs. Assets are correctly added to the Works Hub. And then our project closeout subtask, compiling all that project documentation and finance records, and post-project review and lessons learned session. That's something that we are not great at, the lessons learned from projects, but something we need to focus a little bit better on so that our next projects are better. But then our deliverables, project closeout reports, finance summary, lesson learned document, and any action items that are still left. With our acceptance criteria being the budget reconciliation with finance, asset tags that we sometimes get from finance, that they're added to the materials or the equipment rather, and then recommendations for process improvements that may be identified.
All right, so again, we need to identify that project team and who is going to be on it. So with our air handler replacement and other infrastructure projects have multiple stakeholders. Who is going to serve as the project team members for this air handler replacement scenario?
It's an OR air handler.
Yep. All right. I don't see any hands raised. Anybody?
I think we lost them, Dan.
I think so. They're all asleep, I think.
Yeah.
All right, Seth, who's going to be one? Who's one of our project team members?
Honestly, I got something else going on, so I haven't been paying attention recently.
All right. At least you're honest.
Mr. Willard.
So I would include the OR manager, for sure. The mechanical contractor, the mechanical engineer. Now I'll stop there because other people are raising their hand.
All right, Melissa.
Well, that was a couple of them I was gonna say. I would think somebody definitely from plant engineering.
Yep, most definitely. Matt.
Infection control.
There we go. Yep. I was waiting for that one, especially
And-
an OR air handler.
Yeah. And Tim McMurtry,
No,
the
we like to
guru
leave
of
them
all mechanical.
I don't like to include him on mine.
That was a joke.
Oh.
Seth's not listening.
All right. I think we kind of identified most of them. Internal project manager, obviously, surgical department team members. I think we talked about that. Plant engineering, infection control, the hospital's operations director, facility administrator, design, and engineering. So yeah. Excellent.
Yeah, I would just add a couple to that as well, because usually there's the Pyxis equipment that's in the ORs and OR areas, and sometimes they like to be involved with that as well. And obviously, also sterile processing, leader from sterile processing, because there's usually supplies that are left in the OR area and may need to be relocated and change that process up. So, all right. Again, just like we did, with our room renovation project, we're verifying, validating those new cost estimations, getting those updated equipment costs, materials costs, labor costs, and contingency. Again, also keep in mind, it's critical if it's a capital project and it's being submitted and it's not going to get approved for 6 months, a year, or whatever, that you're building in that escalation in pricing so that when it is approved, you have enough funds to actually do the work. Especially with equipment costs right now, they can significantly go up over periods of time that could really throw your project off if you don't get those estimates right.
All right. So again, we got the risk assessments. What are we looking at for risk assessments? What kind of forms? Anyone? Steve?
Alice, no, probably not Alice. ICRA definitely.
Mm-hmm.
PICRA.
Yep, PICRA. Yep.
On the roof above the OR. Well, I guess depending on where it is. ILSM maybe. There could be some fire related. You're definitely be having to take devices offline and stuff to do that work. So
Yep, definitely some fire dampers.
above ceiling permits.
Mm-hmm.
You're on a roll.
Associated.
I'm gonna say you're on a roll. So for those that are in ATG, most of them are right there. As you mentioned, the PICRA, the ICRA, the ILSM, the ALSM. Special locking permit. Obviously, you're gonna be locking out some breakers and some electrical panels. Lockout, tag out, that hot work, above ceiling permits, utility shutdown for sure. And then the communication plan, which is going to be huge for those stakeholders.
Very good, very good. All right, so another group discussion. Okay, so in a waterfall project, now waterfall projects, again, they're very planned, very scheduled. This is something we're really used to, is using those, just not that term. It uses milestones. So we want to develop a detailed project plan, timeline with milestones. What are those checkpoints that we want to achieve in the project, so that we can make sure that it's staying on track, staying on line, moving forward. So what would you recommend as project milestones for this AHU replacement project? How would you break up the scope? How would you break up the tasks? What's that look like for you? Casey, you're welcome. You're still on mute, Casey. Sorry.
Yeah, I haven't said anything yet. I'm blank right now.
So milestones, when we're, I look at it more, when I'm putting my schedule together, for the project, and in waterfall, like I said, it's always linear, it's planned, this has to happen before this happens and so on. So as you're moving through, maybe the first one is, your first milestone is, construction drawings. Your construction drawings are complete in the project. You've already done your design drawings, your engineering drawings, and everything. So you've got your construction drawings that you're working through to replace that AHU. So that may be one. That's an example.
So I guess potential milestone, the initiating and planning of the project. I guess yeah, I'm still blank.
Okay. No worries, no worries. Anybody else?
What about placing the order for the unit?
Placing the order for the unit, that could be one for sure. Or it could be the delivery
Delivery.
of
Yep.
the unit, right? Because you've submitted your RFPs, you got your pricing, you put your order in. They've given you a delivery time, 32 weeks or 12 months or 18 months, whatever, so you're just in that somewhat waiting phase for that delivery to happen. So that delivery, I think would be a good one too.
Yeah, and Scotty mentioned vendor schedule.
Vendor schedule. Ryan, you got your hand raised.
Yeah, I guess it goes in line with the delivery of the equipment, but seeing the old equipment being taken out.
Yeah, your
Preparing
demolition
for that
complete.
delivery.
Yep. Yep. That could be one for sure. Matt Daniels, you had your hand raised.
Yeah, I was just gonna say demo and of existing equipment.
Very good. All right, so we're just working through this project here. We got our construction drawings done. We've got our air handler delivered. We've got our demo complete. Then obviously move forward with installation, and you can set the milestones, for whatever you want them to be.
All right. One of the things I would throw in there as a milestone is the kickoff meeting. It's going to be huge. And then, of course, on the end of that, that test and balance, definitely, since it's an OR. So scheduling impacts. Again, we're going to do a group discussion. What are some factors that could impact this air handler replacement?
Lead time.
Lead time, most definitely.
Scotty said weather in the chat.
Could be. Yeah.
That's a good one.
We kind of ran into that with the hurricane that came through not too long ago. They delayed our delivery of a couple of pieces because they were afraid of the weather that was coming, the heavy rains. So yes, most definitely.
Availability of the vendor.
Yep.
Good. Casey, your hand's raised.
System compatibility, existing ductwork, controls, anything like that.
Most definitely.
Definitely.
Brian.
Permitting, get your permits.
Yep.
Yes. Always the wild card.
Anybody else? Dusty.
Oh, electrical. It's electrical may have to be moved due to the size of the piece of equipment or where it hooks up.
Yep, most definitely.
Permit for that too.
Gary.
I would say working with the OR, scheduling times and that kind of stuff.
Yep. Did everything get rescheduled? Yep, exactly. Anybody else?
inspector, their requirements. I know we have electrical inspector that is a lot more demanding. We have to shut off a lot of stuff, so coordinating those shutdowns to allow.
And getting the unit commissioned as well.
Yep,
Regulatory compliances.
exactly. Yeah, Steve, you and I both have that same electrical inspector. In the great state of Mecklenburg County.
I believe Mint Hill's got it too.
Yep. All right. So definitely, I think we hit them all. Did procedures get rescheduled before the work could begin? Then we talked about that. Well, weather impact, the equipment installation or testing. Were noise and odors assessed for impact and other patients in the area while work was performed? Were equipment and material selections available? That lead time we were talking about. Was the work completed on time? Were unforeseen conditions discovered while performing the work? Kind of like I think Casey brought up, the ductwork size. So yes. If inspections were required, were they completed and passed? Yep. And then were all required permits filed and approved on time? And then the DHSR revisit. Excellent, guys.
All right, we've come to our second break. 10 minutes. It's 11:17 right now, so 11:27. Everybody get up and stretch and do a little yoga and do all that fun stuff. We'll see you in a few minutes. All right, it is 11:27. We are halfway through our class. Only 2 hours left. At least Dan got it. Nobody else got it. But
Nobody else caught it. Yep.
I didn't hear. What'd you say?
we're halfway through our class, only 2 hours left.
Hmm.
No, we're halfway through our learning objectives. But okay, so now we're going to talk a little bit about lean project principles. So we'll start off with our group discussion here. So what are some areas within a project where waste can be eliminated? So lean, if y'all are familiar or not, lean is a process really focused on the reduction of waste in projects based on efficiency and continual improvement of projects. It's a Japanese model that they started when and they were using it in Toyota manufacturing. That's where it started. So what are some areas? Also, you may hear waste in this instance referred to as muda. Lindsay likes to throw that around. That's the Japanese term for waste. You will hear this stuff in future classes too. So again, with our group discussion, how can we eliminate some waste in projects? Anybody heard of lean processes before?
I believe Brian and Seth.
Brian, you got your hand raised.
Sorry, I was having a little difficulty with my screen. I lost my connection
No
and
worries.
I was struggling to get it back. But Toyota kind of introduced a par level inventory to where they didn't have a lot of stuff on the shelf waiting to reduce overhead. So when it got ordered, then they made it. That was one of the things that they implemented. And I know Novant's tried to, in years past, maybe we still try to do that. I know
I believe it's called just in time.
we try to do that, with our parts and engineering and whatnot.
Yeah, very good. Very
Yep.
good. Yeah, that's a good example for sure. And it is something we try to implement with our stock and inventory that we have. That just in time ordering, as Seth mentioned. Any other thoughts on waste reduction for projects with the lean methodology? Talked about some materials. What else? What about time?
I was about to ask if that includes time.
Most
Yeah.
definitely.
It includes anything, where you can accumulate waste. So time.
Yeah, I was gonna say just like limit meetings to, only things that are relevant or, that have changed that need to be discussed. When we first started our project out here, this expansion project, there were tons of meetings, weekly meetings that we just eventually kind of weeded them out, only to maybe bi-weekly or monthly, to where, we weren't wasting everyone's time by discussing the same thing week after week.
Yeah, very good. Very good. Justin?
One thing that we look at or that we've looked at in the past, and it kind of ties into what Brian's saying, but obviously it depends on what the project is, but on construction projects, being consistent with paint, being consistent with your laminate materials, with your countertop materials. That way, any overages that you had on a project can be used somewhere else for a different project. And we're not just, it's not waste, it's not thrown away.
Yeah, it's hard to get some of our designers to look at it that way, but I'm kidding, Melissa. I'm kidding.
Casey's got his hand raised.
I don't know if this will fall into play, but the skills and talents of the ones doing the work. You don't want a plumber doing electrical work.
Mm.
Yeah, agreed. You want to make sure you align those and have those skilled tradespeople or technicians that are aligned and efficient with their tasks. Very good.
Excellent. So our lean methodologies, you guys touched on a few of them right here. The principles are optimizing workflows, the reducing these unnecessary tasks, and then maximizing resource utilization. One of the things that I kind of fall back to, and one of the lean things I've been into, is folding a t-shirt. Most times you think folding a t-shirt, it's not really time, related, but it was funny because once I learned this method, I can fold them in about 3 seconds, and they're nice, square, they fit in the drawer really nice. There's no waste around it. And I was informed that the muda of motion there, the M is movement. And that's what I was reducing. I was reducing how many times I let go of the t-shirt, how many times I, folded it, and it just, and then the size and fit. So it was actually kind of neat to see all that. So it's kind of one of those things that, we probably do some things without even realizing that are lean methodologies.
You do also want to make sure you have a collaborative and transparent approach when you're using lean. I know I've used this before, my time with the upfit team. And this has been several years back now. When I first started at Novant, I started as a technician within the upfit team. I was working in the cabinet shop down there. And I really started putting the cabinet shop together with different tools and stuff that we had in there. Over time, as we added new tools, we improved our processes, and other people started coming in. The team that was working in it at the time brought up how inefficient it was, and that they were struggling because they were carrying plywood from the front of the shop, and they'd take it all the way to the back of the shop, and then they'd have to bring it back to the front and put it on the table saw and so on. So we went through this whole lean process to rearrange and set up and eliminate the waste for that cabinet shop. And we followed the path with the team's input, of how materials first came in, and how can we eliminate actual steps that the team has taken? How can we eliminate those wasted materials that are there? One of the first things we started as we were going through the process, it was we threw away 80% of the stuff that was in the shop, because people were collecting, pieces of drywall that were this big because they wanted to save it, or pieces of plywood that big, and little pieces of laminate and so on. And we had so much stuff, it was causing some of that inefficiency and causing some of that waste of time. So we got rid of all that stuff with a collaborative approach and a transparent approach. We worked with the team. We talked about lean. We did a lot of education first on lean and what it was and what it looked like as we're going through it. And this took us several months to go through this process. Redesign, reset up that cabinet shop where it was more efficient, so you could go from A to B, and you were taking as few steps as possible with materials and so on. So the team was really invested with it. They still are. We still do look for improvements in it and ways where we can reduce that waste and be more efficient in that shop. So I did want to give you that example as it relates to this.
So as we, Ben mentioned that collaborative approach, it's obviously we embrace it in healthcare, in my opinion, because it's that cross-pollination is that first phase. It's that open communication and idea sharing. And then we go to that collective intelligence. And I like to refer this as, those 3 heads are better than 1. So you're getting multi-views, getting a lot of input from the team members on problem solving or ideas. And then you go into the early identification and resolution. This is where the teams identify those potential issues or conflicts. And then you do the proactive problem solving. And then you do basically the problem solving portion of it. This is where you can validate those assumptions, refine solutions. And this promotes the adaptability and the alignment of expectations.
So like I mentioned, there's also continuous improvement that is evaluated throughout the project as it goes on. And with my example, even with the carpentry shop, they're still using it, so it's still going on. So as we identify other areas where we can improve, or maybe we get a new piece of equipment, that needs to be brought in, or new supplies that need to be brought in, you continue looking for ways where you can improve and reduce those wastes. You do sometimes it's necessary to conduct a root cause analysis and ask the 5 whys to understand any underlying factors or issues. The 5 whys, you ask why 5 times. So just like a little kid, sometimes when they're asking why and you're trying to explain something, you do it throughout this process.
Yeah, and as Ben mentioned, that I always show that 2-year-old asking why. They start out with this first question, and then they proceed to ask several. We always think that that's irritating, but they're trying to understand. So that first phase is we're identifying the problem, and that second is the first why. And it's going to promote that mindset of curiosity and critical thinking. So as you answer that first why, it may lead into a repeat process, asking why again, to dig a little bit deeper to try to figure out, okay, why is this happening? And then as you ask these, other 2 whys, which, are not always required, but you may figure out by that second why you've already got to the answer. But, you could read, with that third why, or fourth or fifth, you just get that root cause. And then with all that information, then you implement your solution.
Like Dan said, it might not be necessary to ask 5. When we were getting ready for this class, and we were talking about the example, of the carpentry shop and the redesign, it was identified with 1 why, the initial project, because it was brought to our attention, and the team was carrying the heavy plywood from one location way back in the back, and we're hurting our backs. So that's why we needed to redesign, the process. So with our visual management techniques, you want to visualize workflows. It helps ensure tasks are completed in response to demand, which ultimately improves efficiency and reduces delays. We've talked about the Kanban boards that can be used. We talked about the Gantt charts and everything else to give you that visibility into how you can manage these projects with transparency. Also making sure, like we've discussed, you've got your communications and coordination and decision-making worked out. And then you use value stream mapping and pull scheduling to identify and eliminate waste in scheduling and your resource allocation.
So value stream mapping can be used to track performance metrics, monitor progress, and identify further opportunities for optimization. As in, the carpentry shop that Ben mentioned, you've got to figure out the flow. Where do tools go? Where do the products or the supplies go? How can we limit those steps? So value streaming in that aspect could be very useful. And it's a continued process. You don't want to just stop just because you've solved the problem once. In the carpentry shop, we'll probably add tools, remove tools, and that will change your flow. So this is an ongoing continuous improvement portion.
So we got an example project scenario here. So we've got a hospital expansion project. The project team identifies inefficiencies in the patient flow, which obviously results in prolonged wait times and overcrowded wait areas. So working on this project, what would be some lean practices that could be implemented? You know, maybe you're streamlining your registration process so that you're moving those patients along quicker, or optimizing your clinic layout so that you can have that patient flow move more efficiently.
So another scenario, healthcare renovation project that the maintenance team faces challenges in managing equipment repairs and servicing, leading to downtime and disruption of patient care. So the lean practice that we could implement is alternative equipment maintenance schedules, optimizing spare part inventory, like we mentioned in Toyota, that on-demand type thing, or just in time. And then what are the outcomes? We're looking at, for enhanced equipment reliability and reduced maintenance costs.
We've talked about this example a little bit, and y'all brought some of this up, but during construction, a new healthcare facility wing, the supply chain team struggles with inventory shortages and excess stockpiling, resulting in project delays and budget overruns. I think we've seen some of this in times past for sure. So what lean practices would we implement? Just in time inventory systems, as y'all mentioned. Obviously, that helps to optimize our inventory levels and make sure we have what we need. And then visualizing the material flow. Again, that's similar to the cabinet shop example that we've been discussing. That material flow, how it comes in the door and where it goes from there to make the best improvement and have the most efficient movement with it.
All right, learning objective number 4, and what we're really accustomed to in our environment is change management and the best practices. How do we take that change and make the best decision making? So I've got a quote that's, if you get an email from me, it's a William Denning quote. It says, "You can change without improving, but you can't improve without changing." In healthcare environments, I've not seen one single time where we do not run into some kind of change. I can walk in the morning and think my day is completely planned with my schedule. And, as Seth mentioned, seen just a minute ago, he was involved with something that, he had to attend to that pulls his attention directly away from the things that we were kind of maybe scheduled to do. So those constant adapting and changing environments that we deal with, that's what we live in. It's, like it says up there on the top, change is inevitable in any project, no matter what size or complexity.
Oh, so some of our common causes of change. We've talked about some of these already, but material substitutions. I know I had an instance where this happened when I was at Thomasville. We were working on some chiller plant replacement, and the specs called for piping that was made in the United States. This was right at the beginning of COVID. So that piping was not available. So we had to look for substitution and look for foreign made pipe, which we found. But that obviously had an impact and changed the project because of delays, even though there may have been a little bit cheaper cost. There was a delay in receiving the material. So you might have some of those substitutions that happen. Delays, disruptions, or unforeseen challenges necessitate adjustments to your project schedule. So in the example of the pipe, obviously we had to adjust our material lead time, which then had that trickle down effect, and we were able to compress some tasks, but still saw a delay in that project. But there also may be some inclement weather, supply chain issues, labor shortages. All these things we have experienced before with some of our projects. Obviously, COVID, we saw the biggest impacts with supply chain issues. Currently, labor shortages are some of the bigger issues we have. So those are a few.
Some additional ones that, kind of touch right along with what Ben was saying, those material substitutions, they can also go to material costs with the change. And then another one was that, labor shortages. What we found is, labor rates have increased because of, the shortages. It's that supply and demand scenario. Some other things to consider, but rare. We are in the second most highly regulated. So we got our healthcare industry standards. We've got zoning requirements for towns and cities and counties, and then updated building codes. Think about if your project got delayed and they're in the middle of redoing some codes, and all of a sudden, next thing you know, it's affecting you. Those are some of the other things that consider.
Also advances in technology, building systems, and medical equipment. I know, for example, like there was a project going on, I think it was at the coast, CT piece of equipment, but they initially selected one vendor for that equipment that was going in a radiology space that they were renovating. But then to go along with this, the end user, they wanted a different piece of equipment or the same piece of equipment, different vendor. But those two vendors have different requirements, and that equipment has different weights and hookups and everything that really can have impacts on your project, your plans, your layouts, your budget. Those end users, when they make some of those changes, I know one thing I joke about a lot with my wife specifically, who works in healthcare. I can picture things in my head. So when I'm doing a project and we're explaining it, we're looking at drawings, things like that. It's easy for us that do this every day to kind of visualize what it's going to look like. Some of the end users we work with, they can't visualize that. So we might get halfway through a project and they see, well, this is not going to work at all. We need to change this. So that can really have a big influence, cause changes to your project. And that us as project managers, we need to make sure we're addressing those stakeholder concerns, incorporating those user preferences, and make sure we have the proper approvals as we proceed with those changes as they happen. You're on mute, Dan, sorry. You're still on mute, Dan.
How did I get muted? Okay. Wow. Managing change requires that proactive and strategic approach in order to remain on track. So the first one is the evaluate that nature of change of scope, maybe. And then, number two is communicate timely and effectively, and then provide clear instructions. Number three, you want to involve the stakeholders, get their input and their concerns. And as Ben mentioned there, they may not be as visual as we are on paper. They may have to see it. And then number four, identify, assess, and mitigate potential risks. 5, update the project plan and closely monitor progress. And then number 6, conduct a project postmortem and document lessons learned. And if you've ever been with Gary Ballard on a project, you will have this at the end of the project, no matter what. He is probably one of the persons that does the lessons learned the best I've ever seen.
All right, we're going to learn it or go into our supplemental reading with our guest speaker, Lindsay.
Thank you, Ben. This first one is never split the difference. So I've just got maybe like 2 or 3 today. This is a really good one for negotiation. So I bring this one into this conversation because anytime that you're negotiating with a contractor or negotiating with other project team members, it might be beneficial for you to have some of these techniques in your back pocket. He's a high stake hostage negotiator. So he's negotiated at the highest levels, the highest stakes, literally someone's life is on the line. And he's taken what he's learned in doing that and provided this book for us. So Chris Voss. Mirroring is really important. I know we've talked about mirroring in some of our communication classes, but to get someone to start to maybe de-escalate, you can show them active listening, you can mirror their behaviors, you can echo their own words so they feel heard and validated. Someone is not going to be receptive to your perspective unless they feel heard first. So these are some techniques to do that. Labeling, so acknowledging what they might be feeling. Maybe they're frustrated, maybe they have some underlying concerns, call those out, make it explicit, say, hey, I've noticed you're frustrated with this, or it seems like you're hesitant about this new approach, and allow them that opportunity to open up and be like, yeah, I am. Tactical empathy. So for those of us who struggle being empathetic naturally, this is a way to use that behavior in a really tactful way so that you can negotiate with others. So put yourself in someone else's shoes to find common ground and identify a win-win. This is an example of what that might look like. I understand you're concerned about the proposed changes impacting your team's workload. It's clear maintaining productivity and morale are top priorities for you, and I completely respect that. So you're acknowledging them. At the same time, we're under pressure to meet the project deadlines and ensure we deliver a high quality outcome. I believe we can find a solution that addresses both of your needs and the project's objectives. So I've stated my perspective and then started to build a bridge with the other person. Let's explore some alternatives together and see how we can adjust the plan to alleviate any undue burden on your team while still staying on track with our overall goals. Your input is invaluable in helping us find the best path forward, and I'm committed to working collaboratively to ensure we achieve success for everyone involved. Now, I know it's not that easy, but you see the steps here. I've acknowledged your concern, I've given my perspective, and now I've opened up dialogue so we can start building that bridge. Thinking in bets, Annie Duke is a professional poker player. So she uses what she's learned from being a poker player and apply that to decision-making. So she introduces the concept of resulting, which means you're judging decisions based on their outcomes rather than the quality at the time they were made. So she introduces hindsight bias and outcome bias. And a lot of times we allow the quality of past decisions to affect the current decision we're making rather than thinking about the probability of what could happen or what are the outcomes from that decision. So what you can do is regularly assess decisions and outcomes to continue to refine that probabilistic thinking. It's an iterative process. So maybe you made a decision, you've learned something, you've seen the outcome, and that will then improve. That's more information that you can use to continue down the decision-making process. Part of this involves scenario planning, decision trees, and probabilistic risk assessment. So scenario planning is you're really thinking about kind of that value stream mapping of like, if this, then this. So you're thinking about all the outcomes, or they could be wild, right? All the wild and crazy possible outcomes that can happen. That makes for a better risk assessment. And then like you do an FMEA, you assess the likelihood and the impact of what will happen. And usually by doing that, it'll tell you, okay, this was probably the most likely thing that was going to happen. This is the outcome, and I can now make a decision based on that. Decision trees where you're visually, you've seen it where okay, so here's the decision I'm making. Here are all the different outcomes. Here are the outcomes of those outcomes. So you can really start to break down the downstream effects of your decisions. And then probabilistic risk assessment, that's quantifying the likelihood and severity of various projects' risk. This is again, very similar to that FMEA. How likely is this going to happen? And then what is the severity of making that decision? It's a systematic approach to analyzing all the possible outcomes, exposing those vulnerabilities so that you can feel confident in the decisions you're making. So I'm going to hand it back over to our instructors, and I'm going to ask that Ben and Dan, you stay on after everyone else leaves so we can do a quick debrief.
All right. Appreciate that. So in summary, we covered a lot, but in bullet points, we'll kind of touch base on at least, all these here. So we've kind of touched on utilizing the project management strategies to control the budget, the scope, resources, to ensure project success and stakeholder satisfaction. Understand the differences between waterfall and agile methodologies, selecting the most suitable approach to match the project requirements and objectives. Incorporate lean principles into project management to streamline workflows, reduce waste, and optimize resource allocation, driving efficiency and value delivery. And then finally, embrace change, which we do in healthcare all the time. Management practices during projects, fostering stakeholder involvement, clear communication, and adaptive leadership to achieve seamless transitions and project success. All right, so questions and answers. Anybody got any questions?
We're finishing on time today, so.
The homework assignment for this will be, you're going to get a description of an example construction project. It's an infrastructure project. You will be asked to provide detailed scope, budget, and produce a Gantt chart for that, as well as a risk mitigation plan. This is going to be a longer homework assignment, approximately 2 hours to do this. If you have any questions, I strongly encourage you to reach out to your mentors. This project was based on one that Dan successfully completed a few years ago, so he would be another resource, and of course, Ben, as instructors for this course. And I do want to apologize again for the mix-up with the time management homework. That new homework has been posted, and it will be due 2 weeks from today to give you a little bit more time.
Any questions? I do appreciate everyone's time today and your participation in the class. Obviously, our goal is that y'all take something away from this and you learn something. So feel free to reach out to us, as Lindsay said, if you have questions with a homework assignment, or reach out to your mentors. But if there are no questions, y'all have a great afternoon.
All right, thanks, guys. And I echo Ben's response there. Appreciate everybody.
Thanks.